A Trump lawyer has been hit with dire news. Prosecutors are looking at them, the lawyer. Here is the legal breakdown with Brian Tyler Cohen and Glenn Kirshner telling you about it.
You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we have some major news here about another Trump-aligned lawyer. That's Stefan Passantino. He's now at risk of being disbarred. Can you explain what happened here?
So this lawyer, Stefan Passantino, who used to work for the Trump White House, at one point was hired, but not by Cassidy Hutchinson to represent Cassidy Hutchinson, but was hired by Trump World, a Trump-aligned PAC, to swoop in and not so much represent Cassidy Hutchinson's interest, but to basically try to protect Donald Trump's interest. And what I can tell you, Brian, is one of the cardinal sins as a lawyer is you are duty-bound to represent your client's interests and represent them zealously. You can never have even dual loyalties to somebody else where you're representing the interests of somebody else. And what became apparent through the reporting and through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the J6 committee is Stan Passantino was hired by Trump World to protect Donald Trump.
Now, is it legal for a lawyer, namely Passantino, to pressure a client to remain loyal to Trump, who's a third party in all of this, versus just telling the truth during her testimony? Like, according to Hutchinson, Passantino's advice was to say as little to the panel as possible, and that was accompanied by assurances that she would get, quote, a really good job in Trump World.
Yeah, it's a great question, because some of what Passantino did was perhaps simply unethical, but then other things that he did that we now know he did because of Hutchinson's testimony were pretty clearly illegal. So part of what
I do want to, just to get the larger point, it is not illegal for Passantino to represent both Trump and Hutchinson, in case he doesn't clarify that here. That part is not illegal. However, not representing Cassidy Hutchinson's interests primarily when he is dealing with Cassidy Hutchinson, that is illegal. And encouraging her to do illegal things, that's real illegal.
What he did is, for example, when Cassidy Hutchinson said, look, I'm very close with Tony Ornato, and Tony told me that Trump tried to strangle the limo driver when he refused to take him to the Capitol. And Cassidy Hutchinson said, her lawyer, Stefan Passantino, said, no, we're not going to talk about that. We need to focus on protecting Donald Trump. That will make an ethical lawyer's head explode, because to directly answer your question, he was suborning perjury. He was urging Cassidy Hutchinson not to testify fully and truthfully to the J6 committee. That is suborning perjury. That is obstructing an official congressional proceeding. It is potentially contempt of Congress. You know, there are a whole host of criminal offenses that I actually believe, based on what we learned through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, Jack Smith must be digging into and considering charging Stefan Passantino criminally. Of course, today we're talking about the fact that a group of prominent lawyers are seeking to have him investigated and ultimately disbarred for being an unethical lawyer.
Okay, here's...
At a minimum, I would hope this guy gets disbarred. Frankly, anybody that was willing to represent Trump under the terms that appeared to be required, which were just facilitating lawbreaking, I would say at a minimum, that's what ought to happen.
What I'm having trouble wrapping my head around, I guess, on the legality front, how is it okay for a lawyer who's representing his client, who's Cassidy Hutchinson here, but also whose legal fees were paid for by a different client, and that is Trump's super PAC, as you mentioned, or Trump's political action committee, to basically harm his first client for the benefit of that third party? Like,
the harm is not legal, but the representation of those two interests, that is legal, and that should be illegal.
Harm Hutchinson, because this is going to do harm to her, all in deference to Trump. Like how is that okay just in legal world?
It's not okay in legal world. And I think that's why you see this complaint that was just filed with the DC bar, signed by, I think, 35 prominent lawyers. They are past presidents of the DC bar, past presidents of the American Bar Association, some of our nation's best legal scholars. They are former attorneys general from various states. I mean, these are, heavy hitters in the legal circles. It's not only not okay, some of what he did may very well be criminal. Now, when you talk about what happens if somebody else is paying your legal fees, that's fine. Listen, if I'm in trouble and somebody else wants to pay my attorney's fees, they can do that as long as they fully disclose it to me, and as long as I am assured that regardless of where the money's coming from, the lawyer is only looking out for my interest. But that was not what Stefan Passantino was doing. He was being paid by Trump World, and he was looking out for the interests of Donald Trump. And here's how it came to a head in one of the ugliest ways, Brian. At one point, Cassidy Hutchinson was advised by Passantino, you know what? Why don't you just consider defying the congressional subpoena? First of all, that is urging a lawyer to have the client commit the crime of contempt of Congress. But here's the kicker. Passantino.
You meant to say that's a lawyer urging the client. But yes, that instructing her to commit a crime. Wow.
Told Cassidy Hutchinson, you know what? Mark Meadows defied a congressional subpoena. Dan Scavino defied a congressional subpoena, and they never got indicted for contempt of Congress. So
steal that money. You can get away with it. Lawyer can't say that. I'm just saying as an example. A lawyer cannot advise or legally cannot advise that you commit a crime.
Advising you as your lawyer to do the same. A lawyer cannot advise a client to commit a crime. But, that illustrates, one, just how unethical Passantino was, and two, just how damaging it is when the Department of Justice decides to forego bringing criminal charges against high government officials like Meadows and Scavino when they inarguably committed the crime of contempt of Congress.
Exactly. This is why it matters that we pursue every crime. This is why I did that entire stream listing all of Trump's crimes and the ones we have already let him get away with because the statute of limitations passed. This is why it's important that we pursue these charges about the fake electors at the state level as well as the federal level. I would rather see there be hiccups in these cases because prosecutors are stumbling over themselves to get charges than what we have seen, which is nothing. We've heard a lot of rumors, and that's it. Even in Fulton County, we've yet to actually see an indictment. I would think any prosecutor would want to be in the history books as being the first who was brave enough and righteous enough to indict a corrupt former president. None wants to be. Maybe they don't have the courage. I don't know. Madness to me. If you want to see the rest of this, the link is in the description. It's the legal breakdown. It's fantastic. I'd like you to listen to this to explain what's going on here and to explain how it is both difficult for these prosecutors to get the boss in such a case, in this case represented by Trump, as well as the absolute mafia-like structure of the Trump organization. This is from a book I'm about to play you called Untouchable by Ellie Honig. Link to that in the description as well. This is Ellie Honig reading from it, explaining difficulties he used to have prosecuting mob bosses.
The phenomenon of House counsel was so predictable that we'd sometimes play this parlor game around it. Anytime we were preparing for a takedown, I'd try to predict which defense lawyers we'd see in court the next morning to represent the newly arrested mobsters. I wouldn't get them all, but usually I'd accurately predict a solid majority, sometimes to the astonishment of younger prosecutors. How'd I pull off this little prosecutorial Nostradamus routine? Easy. I knew it was all about power and money, and the bosses had both. If we had, say, 21 Gambino defendants, as in Russo's case, I'd tick off the names of about that many defense lawyers we knew to be House lawyers, those who understood how the game was played, who would take the money from the bosses, sometimes funneled through other sources, usually without asking too many questions, and who understood that their true mission was to keep their less powerful clients from breaking rank and talking.
When he says House lawyers, he's referring to what was like Stefantino, what was just described. Somebody who is hired by the boss and knows that they are in business with the boss above everyone else, who represents primarily the interest of the boss, and who makes it difficult for prosecutors to flip witnesses, to flip other criminals. I shouldn't say flip witnesses, but to flip lesser criminals who can point to the boss and say, that's the boss of a criminal organization. Well, their attorney is controlled by the boss.
So despite his apparent interest in cooperating, Russo was essentially blocked. If he told his lawyer he wanted to cooperate, word would quickly reach the top of the family with potentially dire consequences. Russo understood that. So he tried a back-channel approach. Just as the Gambino family powers that be funded Russo's lawyer to try to keep him in line, Trump used campaign money to protect himself in ongoing criminal matters. The Trump campaign and associated political entities used tens of millions of dollars in donations to pay for lawyers who represented potential witnesses in criminal investigations relating to Trump, including Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Hope Hicks, and Corey Lewandowski, all of whom witnessed potential criminality by Trump, according to the Mueller report. Trump campaign funds also covered legal fees for his advisor Boris Epshteyn and bodyguard Keith Schiller, both of whom gave testimony favorable to Trump in the House's investigation of Russian election interference. Trump deployed the cash reserves of his private business, the Trump Organization, to similar effect. According to Michael Cohen, the corporation picked up legal fees for Eric Trump, longtime Trump Organization Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg, and Controller Jeffrey McConney, among others.
Are you sensing a pattern? Who flipped and who didn't?
In its fraud investigation, the Manhattan District Attorney targeted and tried to flip Weisselberg and McConney in particular, given their familiarity with the inner financial workings of the Trump Organization. Prosecutors ultimately charged Weisselberg with fraud, and while he agreed to cooperate against the Trump Organization as a corporate entity, he refused to cooperate against Trump or any other individual. And prosecutors granted immunity to McConney by compelling him to testify in a state grand jury, though his testimony didn't hurt Trump badly enough to result in an indictment.
They should be commended, though, for taking a whack at it.
The Manhattan DA, left without an effective insider witness who could directly tie the organization's frauds to Trump himself, ultimately declined to indict him. The state attorney general eventually filed a civil lawsuit alleging fraud, but no criminal charges. Cohen's saga nicely illustrates the implicit bargain. He told me in an interview for this book, quote, Donald would never part with $1 from his own pocket. He'd pay for lawyers using campaign money, Trump Organization money, insurance. It was the ultimate piggy bank. Cohen further described Trump's methodology for keeping his confidants beholden to him. Quote, he'd always be a step or two behind on payments, miss the payment for the first month, then make a partial payment in the second month, Cohen explained. Before you know it, you're so deep in legal fees that you can't stop and you need his money to get out of the hole. That financial pressure to rely on Trump's largesse had the practical effect of preventing people from cooperating, lest they lose Trump's financial backing and meet a fate like Cohen's. When the Mueller investigation began, and before Cohen gave any public indication that he might flip, Trump used campaign funds and Trump Organization money to pay over $1.7 million for Cohen's attorney fees.
He doesn't talk about it here, and I don't have the answer. But the question I'm wondering is that yet another crime? It feels like it ought to be if it's not. And the statute of limitations, I don't think would have expired. But that seems awfully corrupt.
But when the FBI executed a search warrant on Cohen's office and home in April 2018, it suddenly seemed that he might get arrested, the ultimate incentive to flip. At first, Trump tried the sweet talk approach. He called Cohen a good person.
Withdrawn, it would have expired 5 years. Damn it.
And a great guy on Fox News. And he tweeted that Cohen was a fine person with a wonderful family who I have always liked and respected, adding that he did not think Cohen would flip, wink, wink. Less visible to the public in the immediate aftermath of the search warrant, but perhaps more resonant, Trump also made a payment of over $48,000 to Cohen's legal team. Cohen eventually did provide information about Trump to prosecutors and Congress, of course. Trump quickly turned against him, and the money dried up. In an effort to recoup some of his attorney fees, Cohen sued the Trump Organization for $1.9 million in outstanding legal costs that he claimed he was owed as a former employee, alleging that Trump cut him off because he cooperated in violation of the Trump Organization's original contractual promise to cover his legal fees. But a New York state judge dismissed Cohen's lawsuit in November 2021, and Cohen was stuck with his own massive legal bill. Only the wealthiest and most powerful people can reach the level of the mob boss, or Trump, who can pay not only for his own legal team, but also for lawyers to represent other people who need to be kept in line. While Cohen managed to break away, he did so only at great financial and personal cost. And very few people have the independent financial means and the straight-up chutzpah of a Michael Cohen.
Now imagine you're some kid. You're in your 20s. You're working at the White House, already a daunting thing. And you have to try to find the bravery to testify, in essence, in front of national television cameras against the president, former, of the United States.
Making it difficult.
I don't think Cassidy Hutchinson, I'm not going to go too hard against her. I don't think she's necessarily an innocent, because she chose to take that job to further her own career, knowing damn well what a foul person Donald Trump was. But she must be commended for her bravery in the January 6th committee.
Or impossible to cut the financial leash and cooperate against the boss. Trump similarly used the power of the purse strings to selectively pay for counsel for potential witnesses in the House of Representatives' January 6 Select Committee's probe. American Conservative Union Chairman Mattschlapp confirmed to CNN in January 2022 that his organization had raised over 7 figures from donors and that he was in communication with Trump's team about who would receive assistance from this pot of money to pay for legal fees.
Just a reminder for those that haven't been following that particular piece of news, this is the same Mattschlapp who is accused of sexually assaulting a campaign staffer for Herschel Walker.
Trump reportedly was more than aware of this fund and encouraged people to make use of it. Schlapp openly admitted, bragged even, that the money was reserved for those who stonewalled the committee. We are certainly not going to assist anyone who agrees with the mission of the committee and is aiding and abetting the committee, he told CNN. The deal was right out in the open. Trump might authorize payment for your attorneys, but only if you keep quiet.
Listen to that language. Aiding and abetting. Aiding and abetting. A congressional committee. Yeah, you should aid and abet the United States government. Absolutely. What is he talking about?
The committee's probe hit its stride during the summer of 2022, when it held a series of public hearings that revealed explosive evidence of the effort by Trump and other powerful players to steal the 2020 presidential election. In June 2022, over 13 million people watched on television as Cassidy Hutchinson, a former Trump White House aide, testified that Trump knew some of the people in the crowd at the rally held immediately before the January 6th Capitol attack were armed, that Trump nonetheless directed that mob to the U.S. Capitol and that Trump wanted desperately to accompany them there. Hutchinson also testified that her former boss, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani had sought presidential pardons. Among those in the television viewing audience were Justice Department prosecutors who, seemingly beaten to the punch by the committee, were astonished at Hutchinson's revelations, according to the New York Times. Hutchinson emerged as a star witness for the committee only after she shook loose from her original attorney, Stephen Passantino, a former Trump White House ethics advisor who had been selected and paid for by Trump's Political Action Committee. Hutchinson testified before the committee, behind closed doors, 3 times while Passantino was representing her.
This is the guy that Cohen and Kirshner were just talking about. The guy who is now, for this behavior, under investigation himself, it would appear.
But only after she fired Passantino and
recommended for it, I should say.
Retained independent counsel of her own choosing, former federal prosecutor Jody Hunt, did she come forward with additional damning information and agree to testify publicly. The committee, seemingly wary of losing Hutchinson to the sway of Trump world attorneys again, on June 27th called an emergency hearing, despite having previously declared a 2-week recess to have her testify the next afternoon. Hutchinson was not the only witness who received legal counsel originally paid for by Trump and his allies. The New York Times reported that Trump's political organization and his allies have paid for or promised to finance the legal fees of more than a dozen witnesses called in the congressional investigation into the January 6 attack, raising legal and ethical questions about whether the former president may be influencing testimony with a direct bearing on him.
Just bear in mind, with the evidence they uncovered despite that opposition, they ended up recommending 4 charges. 4 charges for Trump. They aren't even the Department of Justice. They don't even have that level of authority. So don't be sympathetic to Garland, no matter how much people try to tell you, oh, he's doing everything he can. No, a bunch of civilians did a better job.
The Times noted that the episode raised questions about whether Mr. Trump and his allies may, implicitly or explicitly, be pressuring witnesses to hold back crucial information that might incriminate or cast a negative light on the former president. While it's not necessarily illegal for Trump or any third party to recommend a lawyer or to pay for another person's legal fees, the undeniable practical reality is that this makes it more difficult for the recipient to turn against the benefactor. Hutchinson managed to break free despite enormous financial and political pressure to the contrary. But many other potential witnesses over the years took their assigned counsel paid for by Trump and his political organization and either towed the party line or stayed mum altogether. In the broader view, it's not unusual for a company to pay for attorneys for its employees. This happens regularly across industries, and lower-ranking individuals or employees often want the boss or the corporation to pick up their tab for legal expenses, which can run well into the 6 figures in major investigations.
But
as a natural consequence, however, it becomes difficult for those employees to cooperate against their superiors and colleagues or former colleagues, particularly when the employee understands that the benefactor will cease paying his legal fees if he flips. In fact, the Justice Department once formally recognized that witnesses are less likely to cooperate when a corporation is paying their attorney's fees.
before he tells you why that is, see if you can remember in your head the reason why the Justice Department will not indict a sitting president. Is there a law that says they can't?
According to longstanding DOJ policy, when
DOJ policy. They inhibit themselves unnecessarily from going after powerful people, resulting in the image on that book right there. The law not applying to them.
prosecutors were determining whether to bring criminal charges against a corporation, quote, the department reserved the right to consider such payments negatively in deciding whether to assign cooperation credit to a corporation, end quote. In other words, DOJ recognized that it is inherently more difficult for an employee to cooperate with prosecutors when a company pays for that employee's attorneys, and it was formal department policy to discourage and potentially punish this type of arrangement. But in 2008, the Justice Department reversed course, instead declaring that it generally would not penalize companies that paid legal fees for their employees. In announcing the policy change, DOJ declared optimistically that, quote, "The department shares a common cause with responsible corporate leaders. We are both committed to promoting the public's trust and security in our capital markets," end quote. The Justice Department enacted this pro-corporation, anti-cooperation policy change through a simple internal memo, which garnered minimal mainstream public attention.
Let me just reiterate what they said. They said, you can trust capitalism. You can trust corporations. We share a common cause with corporations. No, we do not. In fact, we require law enforcement to be as strict as possible against corporations because we already have an uphill battle fighting their financing in court. That is a ridiculous internal memo. And what you can do, I recommend we contact the DOJ and say, rescind that immediately. We've seen with Norfolk Southern the character of these corporations. They don't give a damn about human beings. The DOJ is supposed to. Rescind the memo.
And this permissive policy has been on the books at DOJ ever since. So what can we learn from this? If you're a boss, it's vital to keep your co-conspirators, employees, colleagues, henchmen, what have you, under your thumb to prevent cooperation. One remarkably effective way to do that is by choosing and paying for their lawyers. An unsophisticated boss might resort to open threats against prospective cooperators, but those tactics are obvious and likely to provide evidence of obstruction of justice if discovered by prosecutors. But paying legal fees for others is generally perfectly legal. DOJ is just fine with the practice now, and it can even look charitable on the surface. Few people can afford to pay their own attorney's fees in a major case. And if they're reliant on the boss's money, it becomes difficult to flip. It's a clean, common, and remarkably effective, but often overlooked tactic that the savviest bosses use across industries to protect themselves from prosecution. As the saying goes, take the king's coin, do the king's bidding.
So we don't have to take this lying down, this behavior from our Justice Department. There's a couple of things we can do. Number one, tell your representatives at the state and federal level that you want laws that ban bought lawyers with conflicts of interest. There's a link to find your representatives in the description. I can't recommend it strongly enough. We need to end that practice. That is the practice that put Cassidy Hutchinson in the position of requiring Bravery to do her duty. Number two, we can demand that the DOJ reverse its 2008 internal memo decision, or decision via internal memo, preventing corporations from being punished for corrupt attorney practices. The link to contact the Department of Justice, that's available in the description. All you got to do is click on that, fill out the form, and put your opinion in there. And people at the Department of Justice will see that you see them and that you demand a change in how they operate. Use it. Put public pressure on these people.